Daily Tech News Show is made possible by you, the listener. Thanks to all of you, including Hector Bones, Tim Ashman, Johnny Hernandez, and Gwen Zilks. On this episode of DTNS, TikTok plays nice with the music industry. The reviews are in for the new Mac Mini and its M4 processors. And Huyen Dao gives us the dev perspective on Google's claim that 25% of its new code is generated by AI. This is the Daily Tech News for Friday, November 8th, 2024 in Los Angeles. I'm Tom Merritt.
From Studio Animal House, I'm Sarah Lane.
I'm the show's producer, Roger Chang.
And joining us, Android developer and host of Android Faithful podcast, Huyen Dao. Welcome back.
Hey, good to be back, guys.
Hey,
oh,
good to have
and
you.
fireworks. That's how happy I am. The FaceTime gestures are coming out.
That's lovely. Yeah, thank you for preparing a fireworks show for us.
Just for you guys.
Appreciate
100%.
that. Yeah, it's good to be back myself. I haven't been on the show for 2 weeks now. So, yeah.
We missed you, Tom.
I missed me too. And I missed you all.
Well, yes. So, all is right with the world again.
But if I recall correctly, we generally start the show with the quick hits.
Yeah. No, we still do that.
Okay.
The information sources say that Amazon wants to increase its investment in Anthropic in exchange for Anthropic training its models on AWS using Amazon Silicon instead of NVIDIA. Anthropic needs the funding to keep training, so the company may be willing to go for it.
The AMD Ryzen 9800X 3D CPU is selling out. I mean, it's selling well, not like, it's sold out to make synth music or something. The Verge notes that you can't find it. Look on Newegg, look on Best Buy. The majority of Micro Center locations, they're all sold out. UK's Scan is accepting pre-orders, but the stock isn't coming back until November 29th, and it's coming back in December for some other resellers. If you look on eBay, you'll find it listed for as much as $999. That's well above the $479 list price, an indication that it's hard to get. This is likely more about popularity than poor supply chain management, right? It could be they just didn't make enough, but it seems like people just really want this. There were people lining up outside of stores to get it. AMD's CPU market share has been rising too. People like the AMD CPUs, rose 10% last year, according to Mercury Research, and that was before the popularity of the 9800X 3D.
Analyst Ming-Chi Kuo reports that Apple is looking at adding a variable aperture lens to the iPhone in 2026. So, what would we expect from that? It might be the iPhone 18 or something like that. Kuo has solid supply chain sources and thinks that Sunny Optical and Largan Precision are being asked to prepare to deliver the variable aperture lens. If you're wondering what that even means, it would let the iPhone's camera better adjust to different lighting conditions and offer sharper focus and smoother background blurs.
Multiple lawsuits against OpenAI for how it trained its models are in process, and we saw one of the first decisions to come down this week. It's not the last or even the definitive one in this case. New York federal judge Colleen McMahon, though, dismissed a lawsuit from Raw Story and Alternate. Those companies had accused OpenAI of violating the DMCA by removing author names, titles, and other identifying information from the articles it used to train its large language models. Judge McMahon ruled that the companies failed to show a cognizable injury from the actions. In other words, they couldn't show how they were harmed. The judge added, and I think this is the important part, the likelihood that ChatGPT would output plagiarized content from one of their articles seems remote. In other words, the judge acknowledged, this isn't really going to just copy your articles. The judge added that it seemed like the companies want compensation for use, not redress for removal of information, and therefore Raw Story and Alternate say they plan to file an amended complaint.
Sony says it has sold 65.5 million PlayStation 5s as of September 30th. Quarterly sales were down 1.1 million over last year, but game sales rose 14.9%. Role-playing game Black Myth Wukong reportedly sold 20 million units in Q2. Overall, Sony has 116 million PlayStation Network subscribers.
Well, TikTok launched a feature Thursday that lets you share a song from Apple Music or Spotify into TikTok. So you just press, the little share button and then send it to TikTok, and it will make a little album art card for you. You can share single tracks, whole albums, playlists, and with Spotify, you can even share podcasts and audiobooks. You can do it as a DM, or you can post it to stories or the feed. You can share it as a video or a photo. That default image and title would appear behind you with the green screen feature on the video. Viewers then see where you shared it from. And so they can then go click on that and it'll take you back to Spotify or Apple Music to listen to the whole track. It does seem like this is TikTok finally playing nice with the music industry, right? Because it's sending traffic to the platforms, not just taking it from them. And then, of course, the music labels work well. I don't know if this is going to affect your life at all, but what do you think?
I think I'm always for the high tide lifts all boats, and it makes a lot of sense. As someone who, I guess in the last year has had learned how hard it is to promote and get awareness on your podcast, I think this makes a lot of sense. And I think it's always that kind of backtracking, which is always difficult, because I think so many times I listen to a TikTok or watch a TikTok. We don't just listen to them, we watch them, I suppose, if you have sight. And it's that kind of like connecting it to the source, which is always the hard part, which I guess is sticky for certain things. So, I mean, I don't want to say necessarily, yay, all the big industries are going to get more money or traffic or revenue from somewhere or another. But I don't know. I think it makes sense for creators and things like that to be able to kind of have that visibility. So I like it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with TikTok is not every single TikTok I watch is, a music track, but many are. And for TikTok to say, all right, Apple, Spotify, we know you're getting it from we're getting it from your sources anyway. Let's all play nice together. So I, Sarah, watch one of Huyen's extremely cool exercise videos, and there's a cool song, and I'm like, oh, it's on Apple Music, cool. I already subscribed to Apple Music, so now I know more about that song that I wouldn't have heard otherwise. That's where I think this is all going.
So the way that would work is when you would have to share the song into TikTok and then do your exercise video in the green screen mode in front of the album art, and then it would link back to the song. That could work, right?
That could work. That'd be difficult, but that could work.
But you wouldn't have, even if you didn't have the album art, you could just say, "Oh yeah, this is where it came from."
100%.
Yeah, but then you don't get the track back stuff. You don't get the link back stuff.
You have to do the album art?
Well, that's the way it works, right? You press share from Spotify, it creates the little card of like,
I
here's
see. It
GPT
has to be part of the video somehow. Yeah. That's right. Interesting. Okay. I mean, I don't know. I think that for some people, they'll be like, I don't care. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to rip songs otherwise. But TikTok, wanting to play nice in general with a variety of, regional folks, this makes sense. And I'm not much of a Spotify user, but I am an Apple Music user and certainly Apple Podcasts. So, yeah.
I tried it out. Request, there's a song about GPT out from a group called Stacy. And so I wanted to try this out. So I was like, I would never have made a TikTok video about this, but it was kind of fun to be like, let me just share the track. And then I wrote in the commentary. I didn't do the video. I wrote in the commentary, like, first song I've seen about the Transformer. Here it is. And then people can go check it out. So it was a way, granted, I was doing this to try out how it worked, but it was a way to create content that I wouldn't have created otherwise.
Yeah. Well, TikTok.
It would be nice if it was more integrated. I think that's the thing with Instagram, like you were saying, Sarah. And thank you for always, giving me props on my exercise videos. But it's integrated, right?
If anyone's not watching Huyen's exercise videos, I mean, talk about inspiration.
I appreciate
seriously.
Yeah. But I do like that because you can pick, licensed music as a backing track, basically. And I mean, I just feel like that would work so well with the existing TikTok model, that it's there, it can be transparent, but that there is a link back. Maybe that's for the future once they get this particular feature and work out all the logistics and revenue, et cetera of all that. But I would like that as a feature request. TikTok folks, just saying, like, make
Take it
so
down.
It can be,
Note it.
Note it. Thank you.
And then real quickly, since we're talking about TikTok, Derek on Patreon wanted to clarify Canada is not shutting down TikTok or access to TikTok from Canada. They've told the Canadian division of TikTok Corporation to wind up operations. They said clearly the Canadians can still access and post content to TikTok. That's what we said yesterday on the show. But in the discussion, we sort of ranged into speculation about like, well, what if they did ban TikTok entirely? So good to
Derek is just
good to just clarify,
keeping it real.
Canadians
that's not what's happening at this point.
And I wrote about this in my Substack newsletter today. I think it is really interesting that they're not going the route of India or the United States in saying ISPs have to block it or app stores have to stop listing it. They are merely shutting down the operation in the country. That will make it harder to sell ads and such like that. It implies to me that Canadians' security concerns are about personnel, not as much about the app, which makes more sense to me.
Well, as somebody who is eagerly awaiting my new Mac Mini, which I have talked about ad nauseum for quite some time now, Apple has expanded high power mode. If you don't know what that is, it's Apple's feature in macOS, Ventura, and later, which up until now has allowed better performance for demanding workloads. To Macs with the M4 Pro chip, including the Mac Mini, now getting it. Now, if you're like, well, wait a second, I already had this. It was previously only available for the 14-inch MacBook Pro with M3 Max and the 16-inch MacBook Pro with either the M1 Max, M2 Max, or M3 Max. So the M4 Pro powered Mac Mini now gets access to high power mode, as do the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros that Apple also announced. Designed to boost fan speeds to support heavy workloads. Sounds promising. Ars Technica and some other folks who have gotten early testing capabilities say, actual performance boost, not that much overall. Slight lift in GPU heavy tasks like video rendering, but, a little bit of a boost. The downside also apparently includes fan noise. And for anybody, including me, who has Apple Silicon, in any sort of Mac, the whole point is like, oh, it's super silent. So reviews pretty positive, even for entry-level minis. But when I know that you do a lot of testing based on your work. So what do you think about this?
I'm actually pretty excited about it. And this is that just for the GPU, or is it just, is there a CPU boost as well? Or is it just GPU boost?
Well, it's both. It's both, but it sounds marginal.
Okay. So this is really interesting because even as an Android developer, I would say most of us use MacBooks. And that's because macOS is kind of built on top of Unix. And so a lot of that, plus command line stuff, help us in our day-to-day job. So just letting you know, Android folks, or Android fans, we're probably using Macs. I am. And it's really interesting because one of the limiting factors of productivity for an Android developer is actually building your app. Just that whole process of turning code into a binary. And while there's a lot that can be done from the Google side, the tooling side of that, a lot of the solutions in the last, I'd say, ever since Apple Silicon came out, a lot of the solutions that we've had is just buying more powerful Macs to get us like a reduction in that build time and to get some more productivity back. It's a whole thing. It's like a whole thing. Build times and just buying, not even kidding, buying Apple Silicon has been a solution. And so there's a lot of things that go into this, and most of us have MacBook Pros. I mean, I think that's fair to say, but for companies that have a little less resourcing, that can't buy a MacBook Pro all the time, the Mac Minis and other kind of more desktop devices have been really appealing. So I'm all for this. Like, even if it's like a moderate, even if it's like kind of negligible to moderate increase, I'm actually really excited for it. And I think it's just kind of the world that I live in as a dev is that, yes, a little bit of CPU boost can save me some time compiling and maybe more productive.
Yeah.
That sounds really lame and corporate, but it is.
But if it's true, it's true.
But it is true. And even just like, I'm trying to give like an example without going too deep, but like when I'm building a UI, a lot of times I just have to keep building over and over and over again. And there's a big difference between having to wait a minute versus having to wait 20 seconds for something to recompile. And that's like the level we're at. We're just like trying to shave off seconds just so that we don't have to break context flow. So yeah, I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but I'm all for anything that gives me a few extra seconds back.
Yeah, Ars Technica says, at least on the Mac Mini. So this was a feature only for Max chips and Ultra chips before. So you can get it in the laptops.
Yeah.
You just couldn't get it in the Mini. And for the Mini, the amount was so negligible they didn't bother to make charts to show the difference on the CPU tests. They saw an upward nudge in a couple of GPU tests, and Apple has said you'd probably see the benefit more on the GPU side than the CPU side anyway. So I don't know that it matters now, but it is interesting to see them at least enable that advantage, because I think it points to the future of, like, I don't know if it's other Mac Minis or M5s or something might be able to make better use of this, and maybe it's in the laptops and not in the minis.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this also sounds like it's really like, do you care about fan noise or do you not care about fan noise? I didn't used to care about fan noise because I had it when I was running something that, was making my laptop sweat a little bit, or my desktop type thing. Now I'm like, oh, wow. My poor Mac Mini that is still sitting on my desk. You can't see it, but I'm sorry, Mac Mini. I really do love you, circa 2018. But, that thing, I mean, it was like wheezing, truly, and that's what, for quite some time, we were just used to. If a computer is really being put to the test, it's going to be like, fan, cool, and all that stuff. And we're getting to a point now where we have computers, and this is not just Apple, it's, a variety of manufacturers can do this, that a computer is sort of expected to just be sort of silent and not in the way. And, if you're gonna go high power mode, it's gonna be less silent.
Yeah, I think in this case, it's sort of just a fan noise mode, right? It doesn't give you enough power. So it's like, well, if I want to hear some fan noise, I can turn on high power mode on the Mac Mini. But.
Yeah, maybe it's a nostalgia thing. I don't know.
But it is like almost like I had the word a second ago, like a new kind of decorum or politeness, like especially on calls, since, ever since the Panini, we've all been, living a lot of our lives on calls. And I did have, I think back then, I had like someone said that to me and it just stuck with me because I didn't want to say the word like it.
I knew what you meant. Yeah.
So I had a 2018 MacBook Pro for a long time, and at some point it just started to sound like a jet engine every single time I used it, to the point it got distracting on calls. So then it becomes kind of like a kind of like being considerate to your like call mates to not have the
jet engine
to be distracting. So I mean, I don't personally care, and I probably would run high power mode when I'm just at my desk alone. But I mean, hey, there you go. Just it's just now considered polite to have a quiet computer.
Yeah, indeed. Well, if you have a thought about what else is considered polite in your computing world or anything at all, you can email us. Our email address is feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com. During its Q3 earnings call last Tuesday, Google CEO Sundar Pichai made mention that more than 25% of new code at Google is generated by some kind of AI, with human programmers reviewing and improving the outputs, of course. Pichai also stated, we're also using AI internally to improve our coding processes, which is boosting productivity and efficiency. Back in February, Business Insider reported that Google had spun off a model from Gemini for internal use called Goose. That model was trained on Google's 25 years of software development, letting it generate a modified code using natural language queries. So it's probably Goose that's being talked about when Pichai says they're getting 25% of the code from their own internal models. When you're a developer for Android, how does this news land with you?
I have to admit, when I first read that article, I was a little bit skeptical because 25% felt like particularly high. But I think it makes a lot of sense, kind of looking into Goose and seeing that it is a very like tailored model to how Google, the Google internal practices. And I mean, okay, I'll say I've been extremely like not quiet about my dislike of the general AI craze right now, but as a developer, it's almost like I'm the complete opposite. And it's been, I think I quickly came around to the idea that this is a very empowering and a very, like, I hate using the productivity word again because it just sounds a little too corporate. But it is a really big productivity boost, and it can allow us to do some really cool things. So I think that now that I think about it more, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it is something that we're going to be continuing to see and be continuing to use. And it really will, I think, for on average, like make lives better for developers. I really, really do. But yeah, it really kind of depends though. I think it just depends on, like, for example, like Google using their own internal model. I can't even, I'm trying to think of a metaphor for that, but it's like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense for them to get that kind of level of productivity out of it. It sounds scary. And I have relatives asking me, are you okay? Like, are you going to have a job?
Yeah. Are you going to get replaced by Goose?
Well, and that's the whole thing. I mean, as somebody who's actually a developer, when you say, as a developer, it is helpful. As a human outside of that realm, you're not so sure. What do you mean by that?
So the problem that I have with a lot of generative AI things, as a person, as a human being, is that a lot of the generative AI people treat as factual when it's kind of not, like treating it as if it was like Wikipedia or a trusted news source, when we all know that, even Google AI search results or ChatGPT can be a little bit wrong, can give you inconsistent information and not actually be factual. Whereas it's really interesting because programming is more, not to sound too highfalutin about my job, is more creative, right? There's not a single truth necessarily to how you solve a problem. It's like iteration and trying to figure out both your preference and the right thing for the task. And I think that actually is a very compelling use case for things like generative AI and LLMs, because a lot of our job is connecting dots, finding patterns, and making a solution out of those things, which is really rarely perfect. I mean, like, how many times have you had like a bug in your app? You're never going to have a bugless application. And so in that context, I think LLMs can be useful as long as you have a little bit of, like, I guess, discretion and kind of caution in using it. So that's what I think, because I think programming is inherently kind of you're creating new things that, again, don't have like a sense of like, this is factual or not. It's kind of hard to say, but it's more of like a kind of like, because if it's more of a creative endeavor than you like to think, it makes a lot of sense for this.
When these LLMs are tailored, it feels like they work better.
They do.
And they're very tailored for coding. And obviously Google tailored it even more to its own coding. That seems to fit in with what you're saying here, which is, the upside is when it's good at a specific thing, you can use it as an assistant for that thing.
It's 100%. And I think that's also the grounding. I think, and that's why I think I'm less surprised than seeing that Goose is 25%, because I'll give you, like, off the top of my head, I think maybe when I was using, Gemini in Studio, which is our assistant in Android Studio, which is Android developers IDE, I may be generating 12 to 10%. And maybe I'm actually underestimating that, but I'm going to spitball 10 to 12%. It makes a lot of sense that when you have a tailored model that is built to your specification, that knows your specific way of coding, your engineering practices, it makes so much sense. And even like having for example, for Android developers, what we have now is context awareness, which is the Gemini will actually look at your project, and through having it, be able to understand your code, you can actually have it as you're typing, try to more or less finish your sentence. And that's what it's doing. And a lot of times, because, LLMs are basically pattern recognizers or things like that, it's really good at it because, I said my job is creative, but it's also kind of repetitive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the key, is like giving the LLM more context, and as much context as you can give it, it'll get even better at guessing. So yeah, and like, so for example, like the feature where I'm typing and it tries to kind of guess what the next thing I want to type is, that is only enabled if I let Gemini take a look at my code. There's a lot of actually issues around proprietary code and like letting Google basically see, a company's proprietary code. And so that's like a thing. So, and that's a challenge too, is like, how do we keep privacy while using these tools? Is actually kind of like a little bit opposing goals, but it's a really interesting time. And I think like, it's amazing. I actually talked to Tor Norby, who's like the engineering director on the Android Studio team, and he's just really excited. And their specific goal is not to replace us, but to, as he said, sprinkle AI productivity throughout our experience.
I mean, I think that's what we all want.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like, can you make my life easier while still, as I do my job?
Yeah.
Why would I say no?
Well, and he actually demonstrated a feature that they're working on last week, where it actually is getting to the point where they can help us. He said, we want to eliminate toil. And not only that, they can kind of do things that are impossible for us to do now. So an example is testing, and not to get too in the weeds, we have to test our code. Like we write tests that kind of, determine whether logic, kind of gives the output that result for a certain input. And there's like a lot of different types of testing. And a lot of that is like, testing little fine grained things, but also UI testing. So say I have like a sign up flow, I might have what is called an integration test, where I test that sign up, like from the showing you of like, the registration page to the success, screen when you finally successfully register. And the good thing to do is to write a test for that. Those are really, really hard tests to write, just because there's a lot going on.
Well, and you don't really, you don't know how the human is going to respond necessarily.
Exactly. And so, that's another great point, is like we often test the happy path, but we often as developers don't think about the weird things that users are able to do to make things go wrong. So they're working on features that can actually find these, like can suggest these edge cases. And actually, Tor demonstrated something that was really cool. He was like, okay, say you wanted to just test whether your play pause button switches appropriately from icon to icon. So the current tools that we have now to test that are AI coding stuff. Like it's not, we have to kind of figure out, so do we just load the images and test that, like that the pixels are of this button's icon are in the right place? Like it's very, like we don't have a lot of way of expressing, hey, is a pause icon showing, surprisingly. But what he showed was that he was using Gemini, like they're using Gemini's multimodality, where it can take like different kinds of like input, like images and words and text and images. And you can actually tell, Gemini, hey, like tell me if the pause button is showing. And rather than say me looking at the individual pixel, like taking a screenshot and looking at the pixels of the button and saying, okay, these look look right for a pause button, or it matches this other image I have. AI is literally saying, like, AI is looking at my screen, understanding what's going on with the screen, and saying, oh yeah, there's a pause button here, like a person would do. And that's, I know that the distinction is really fine, like really fine, but it's huge. It's huge, right? And he was giving another example where, say, like this is not real example, but say you're working on like a Google Maps type, application, and you want to test that if the user inputs like this from this location to that location, that the result shows a route from A to B. Tor is basically saying eventually you can do that, and like. I can't explain. It's hard to describe how saying, oh, there's a route from A to B, how hard that would be as a programmer to describe in code. Whereas you can just tell the LLM to do that like you would a person.
Yeah.
And it's smart enough to make that connection without, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of crazy.
It takes out the tedium of having to figure that out.
Yeah. And that's wasted time. And so I get to still, and these tools aren't replacing me. I actually asked Gemini and Android Studio to write me an app, and it only gave me like 10% of what I needed. And there's still a lot, like for me as a senior engineer, to do, like connecting dots, deciding what's best, for me interacting with like things like backend and like other things that Android Studio and Gemini won't have anything to do with. But yeah, it takes the toil out and it leaves me like time to do the good stuff. So yeah, it's pretty good.
I feel like your job, Huyen, is a really great example of, where AI is helpful, but not quite there yet.
Yeah.
For someone like me, because I'm not writing code, but I talk about people who write code, it's more like sometimes I feel like it's a little bit of an ego thing where I'm like, that's not what I would have said. That just doesn't sound like me, like get better, Gemini, or whatever the AI system is. But when it really comes to facts, that, that's a big part of all this.
Yes.
Well, if you want to hear more about how Huyen thinks and what she talks about, of course, you can find her on androidfaithful.com. Huyen, what's going on with that show these days?
We're doing a lot. We're writing. We're having great interviews. We had a great interview with a couple of execs over on the Android team at Google. And we're just reviewing and talking about Android. So yeah, join us every Tuesday night or check your podcaster of choice for us.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's can't miss. It's a great crew. Y'all have a great time. I enjoy listening. And I know everybody else will too if they haven't checked it out. androidfaithful.com. Also, I just got back from a big trip, so this week's top 5 is all about things you can use on long flights, technologies that I use to kind of pass the time or keep yourself occupied or just, make your travel life better. You can catch that at Daily Tech News Show on TikTok, DTNS Picks on Instagram, and of course, youtube.com/Daily Tech News Show. Patrons, stick around for the extended show Good Day Internet. It's Friday, and Roger has created a quiz to let Huyen beat us all. It's about Android releases and dessert
so
names.
Unfair already,
yeah.
But.
Can you correctly pair the dessert with the Android release? Join us and play along with us. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, it will be fun. Just a reminder, you can catch our show live Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. That is 2100 UTC. And you can find out more at dailytechnewsshow.com/live. We are off Monday for the Veterans Day holiday in the U.S. We'll be back on Tuesday. We hope you have a great weekend.
This week's episodes of Daily Tech News Show were created by the following people: host, producer, and writer Tom Merritt, host, producer, and writer Sarah Lane, executive producer and booker Roger Chang, producer, writer, and co-host Rob Dunwood, video producer Joe Kuntz, producer at large Anthony Lemos, Spanish language host, writer, and producer Dan Campos, science correspondent Dr. Nikki Ackermans, social media producer and moderator Zoe Detterding, our mods: Beatmaster, W. Scottus 1, BioCow, Captain Kipper, Steve Guadarrama, Paul Reese, Matthew J. Stevens, aka Gadget Virtuoso, and J.D. Galloway. Mod and video hosting by Dan Christensen. Music and art provided by Martin Bell, Dan Luders, Mustafa A., Acast, and Len Peralta. Acast ad support from Tatiana Matias. Patreon support from Tom McNeil. Contributors for this week's shows included Tim Stevenson, Chris Christensen, Scott Johnson, and Justin Robert Young. Our guest this week was Huyen Tui Dao, and thanks to all our patrons who make the show possible.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.